You're just a help. Know your place. Claire Whitmore's voice sliced through the Grand Meridian Ballroom so sharply that even the string quartet seemed to lose its rhythm. The room had been glowing seconds earlier, crystal chandeliers, white roses floating in tall glass vases, waiters moving through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. Nearly 400 guests had gathered beneath the gold-trimmed ceiling for the Whitmore Foundation's annual gala, dressed in tuxedos, silk gowns, and enough diamonds to light a city block. Then Claire lifted her hand. The sound was small. The silence afterward was not. Danielle Brooks stood perfectly still beside the marble bar, one hand resting at her side, the other holding a black evening clutch. Her deep emerald gown was elegant but understated, without a designer logo or a glittering necklace to announce her wealth. She had arrived alone. No security detail. No assistant. No flashing cameras. That had been intentional. Across from her, Claire Whitmore stared with the confident cruelty of someone who had spent her entire life believing a room belonged to her because her last name was printed on the invitation. A thin line of champagne shimmered on the floor near Danielle's shoes. Claire had bumped into her only moments earlier, then smiled as if the accident had been a joke everyone should understand. I said excuse me, Claire snapped, loud enough for the guests nearest the bar to hear. Or do people like you only listen when someone raises their voice? A few heads turned. A man in a navy tuxedo looked down at his drink. A woman near the auction table pressed her lips together but said nothing. Danielle's face did not change. She had seen that look before. Not Claire's exact face, but the same expression. The assumption. The casual certainty that a black woman standing quietly in a room full of wealth had to be there to serve it, not shape it. Claire glanced at the broken champagne flute on the floor, then pointed toward it with one manicured finger. Pick that up, she said. Danielle looked at the glass. Then she looked back at Claire. You dropped it. Claire's smile disappeared. Behind her, Richard Whitmore moved through the crowd with the practiced stride of a man used to being greeted before he spoke. At 62, he wore a midnight blue tuxedo and the expression of someone already counting tomorrow's headlines. His family's real estate empire had been struggling for months, but tonight was supposed to change everything. Before midnight, the Whitmores expected to announce a $1 billion investment deal that would rescue their company, restore their influence, and put their name back on every business page in America. Richard stopped beside his daughter and studied Danielle as if she were an inconvenience placed in his path. Is there a problem? He asked. Claire folded her arms. She's pretending she belongs here. Danielle's gaze stayed level. I do belong here. Richard gave a quiet laugh, the kind that invited others to join him. Then perhaps you can tell us whose table you're assigned to. At the far end of the ballroom, Maya Collins froze beside the event check-in desk. She was 26, exhausted from managing last-minute seating changes, and she had spent the entire evening trying not to make mistakes in front of the Whitmore family. But she knew that face. She had seen it on the private guest list. Danielle Brooks, CEO of Brooks Meridian Capital. The woman whose signature stood behind the largest investment proposal in the building. Maya opened her mouth. Her manager caught her eye from across the room and gave a warning shake of his head. Stay quiet. Don't interfere. Back at the bar, Claire stepped closer to Danielle, still unaware that the woman she had humiliated was the one person who could decide whether the Whitmore empire survived the night. Security is going to walk you out, Claire said. Danielle's voice was calm, almost soft. You may want to think carefully before you do that. Richard smiled as if he had heard a threat from someone powerless. No, he said. I don't think I do. Richard Whitmore did not wait for an answer. He lifted 2 fingers toward the ballroom entrance, and within seconds, a security supervisor in a dark suit began walking across the polished floor. The guests noticed. They always noticed when power moved through a room. Conversation softened. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The orchestra continued playing, but the music now sounded distant, like it belonged to another building. Danielle Brooks remained beside the marble bar, calm beneath the chandeliers, while Claire Whitmore stood across from her with a satisfied smile. Claire believed she had won. She believed the room had seen what she wanted it to see, an uninvited woman in a beautiful gown, standing where she did not belong. "You should have left when I gave you the chance," Claire said. Danielle glanced toward the security supervisor, then back at Claire. "You never gave me a chance," she replied. "You made a decision before you knew my name." Claire gave a short laugh. "Your name does not matter." That sentence landed harder than Claire intended. Not because Danielle looked wounded. She did not. But because several people nearby heard it clearly. An older woman in a silver gown lowered her glass. A young man near the auction display shifted uncomfortably. Still, nobody spoke. Wealthy rooms had their own rules. People often confuse silence with neutrality. Maya Collins stood at the check-in desk, her hands tightening around a tablet. Danielle Brooks. The name remained on the screen in front of her, marked with a private gold seal beside it. Executive guest. Principal investor. Authorization level, Meridian. Maya had worked enough galas to understand what that meant. The Whitmore family was not waiting for an ordinary investor tonight. They were waiting for the person who held the future of their company in her hands. Maya looked toward her manager again. He was already walking toward her, his jaw tight. "Do not move," he whispered. "The Whitmores are handling it." "But she is on the list," Maya said, keeping her voice low. "She is not just on the list. She is Danielle Brooks." Her manager did not look at the screen. "I said do not move." Across the ballroom, Richard Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks and addressed Danielle with the polished impatience of a man accustomed to staff obeying before he finished speaking. "My family is hosting an important evening," he said. "We have investors, board members, and public officials here. Whatever misunderstanding brought you into this room can be handled quietly." Danielle's eyes stayed on him. "You believe this is a misunderstanding?" Richard's smile thinned. "I believe you are making yourself the center of attention." Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it sound more personal. "You came in alone. No invitation. No name tag. No one knows you. What exactly did you think would happen?" Danielle looked around the ballroom. At the white roses. At the auction tables. At the enormous projection screen behind the stage, where the Whitmore Foundation logo rotated in gold letters. Then she looked at Claire. "I thought people would show me who they were." For the first time, Claire hesitated. Only for a second. Then the security supervisor arrived. His name tag read Daniel Price. He stopped a few feet away, professional but uncertain. "Sir," he said to Richard, "what is the issue?" Richard did not point. He did not need to. "This guest has been disruptive," he said. "Please escort her outside until we can verify her identity." Danielle's expression remained still. "Disruptive," she repeated. Claire folded her arms. "You spilled into me, argued with me, and refused to clean up your mess." Danielle looked down at the champagne on the floor. "That is not what happened." "It is what everyone saw," Claire said. But that was not true. Everyone had seen enough to know something was wrong. They had seen Claire's hand move. They had heard the words. They had watched Richard turn suspicion into authority without asking a single question. Daniel Price looked at Danielle. "Ma'am, may I see your invitation?" Danielle reached into her clutch slowly and removed a small black card. She held it between two fingers, not offering it yet. "Before I show you anything," she said, "I want you to answer one question." Richard's face tightened. "This is not a negotiation." Danielle ignored him. Her gaze stayed on Daniel. "If I looked different tonight, would you have asked me to leave?" The ballroom went quiet again. This time, even the orchestra stopped. Daniel Price did not answer immediately. His eyes moved from Danielle Brooks to Richard Whitmore, then to Claire, then back again. The black card in Danielle's hand seemed to pull every chandelier reflection toward it. Richard stepped forward before Daniel could speak. "Do not indulge this," he said. She is trying to turn a simple security matter into something ugly. Danielle's expression did not change. It became ugly when your daughter decided I was beneath her. Claire's cheeks flushed. I did not decide anything. You were rude. No, Danielle said quietly. I was present. The words settled over the ballroom. A few guests shifted closer, pretending to admire the auction items while listening to every syllable. Daniel cleared his throat. Ma'am, I am asking for your invitation so I can verify your access. Danielle nodded once. That is a reasonable request. It should have been the first one. She handed him the black card. Daniel took it carefully. The card was heavier than it looked, matte black with a narrow gold edge. He turned it over and saw the embossed emblem, Brooks Meridian Capital. Beneath it was Danielle's name, followed by a title that made his posture change. Chief Executive Officer. Daniel's eyes widened, but Richard noticed only the pause. What is it? He demanded. Daniel did not answer right away. He scanned the card again, then looked toward the stage, where a large gold banner announced the evening's final presentation. The Whitmore Renewal Initiative. Investment Partnership Announcement at 10 o'clock. It was only 9:42 p.m., 18 minutes before the announcement that Richard Whitmore had spent the last year chasing. Claire leaned toward her father. It is probably fake. Daniel looked at her. This appears to be an executive credential. Richard's smile vanished. Appears to be? He said. You are security. Verify it. Danielle watched him with the same calm she had carried into boardrooms, courtrooms, and negotiations where men twice Richard's age had assumed they could outtalk her. Please do, she said. Verify every detail. Across the room, Maya Collins could not stay still anymore. She opened the Gala database and pulled up the private investor schedule. There it was in clear letters. Danielle Brooks. Arrival window, 9:15 p.m. Private welcome requested. No public introduction until final presentation. Maya felt her stomach drop. The Whitmores had not simply insulted an important guest. They had humiliated the woman whose company was scheduled to deliver the largest capital commitment in the family's history. Her manager reached for the tablet. Give me that. Maya held it tighter. They need to know. They do not need you creating a scene, he whispered. Do you understand what kind of family this is? Maya looked toward Danielle, standing alone at the center of a room full of people who had watched and said nothing. I understand exactly what kind of family this is, she said. Near the bar, Claire crossed her arms. So she has a business card. That does not prove she belongs at our gala. Danielle turned her head slowly. Your gala? Claire lifted her chin. My family paid for this room. Danielle glanced at the ballroom ceiling, then at the stage, then at Richard. Your family rented this room, she said. There is a difference. Richard's jaw tightened. Enough. Daniel, take her outside while we sort this out. Daniel hesitated. For the first time, his hand did not move toward Danielle. Instead, he looked at the card again. Then his radio crackled. A voice from the event office came through, urgent and confused. Daniel, confirm the name of the woman near the bar. Is she Danielle Brooks? The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Danielle lifted her eyes to Richard Whitmore. No, she said. We can begin. Richard Whitmore stared at Danielle as if the name had arrived from another planet. For one long second, he said nothing. The confidence that had carried him through the evening did not disappear all at once. It cracked quietly, first in his eyes, then in the way his hand tightened around the stem of his glass. Claire looked from her father to Danielle, waiting for someone to explain why the room had suddenly changed. Daniel Price lifted his radio closer to his mouth. Yes, he said carefully. The woman near the bar is Danielle Brooks. The reply came back immediately. Keep her there. Do not let anyone move her. Ms. Brooks is the principal investor for the Whitmore transaction. The executive team is on the way. The words traveled farther than the radio should have allowed. Guests nearest the bar heard them first. Then the whispers spread through the ballroom in waves. Danielle Brooks. Brooks Meridian Capital. Principal investor. Richard's face lost color. Claire gave a nervous laugh that did not sound like laughter at all. That cannot be right, she said. Dad, this is ridiculous. Danielle looked at her with steady eyes. What part is ridiculous? Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. The answer was too obvious. The woman she had called a server. The woman she had told to clean up broken glass. The woman she had tried to have removed from the Gala was the person holding the decision that could either save or sink the Whitmore family business. Richard finally found his voice. Ms. Brooks, he said, and the change in his tone was so sharp that several guests looked away in embarrassment. There has clearly been a misunderstanding. Danielle did not smile. You used that word earlier. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice as if politeness could erase what had happened in public. My daughter was upset. The evening is stressful. We are all under pressure because of the announcement. Claire looked at him in disbelief. Dad. He did not look at her. I am sure we can move past this. Danielle's gaze settled on him. You are asking me to move past being insulted, dismissed, and treated like a threat because your deal is under pressure? Richard swallowed. I am asking you to be reasonable. Reasonable, Danielle repeated. That is another word people use when they want the person they harm to make them comfortable. The ballroom had become a courtroom without walls. No one was dancing. No one was bidding on auction packages. The band stood silent beside their instruments, watching the same scene as everyone else. Maya Collins moved away from the check-in desk at last. Her manager called after her in a harsh whisper, but she did not stop. She crossed the floor with the tablet held against her chest, passing guests who now made room for her without being asked. When she reached Danielle, Maya's voice shook, but it did not break. Ms. Brooks, I am Maya Collins. I manage guest registration. Your name is on the executive list. You were supposed to be greeted privately when you arrived. Danielle looked at her. Thank you, Maya. Those two words seemed to give Maya more courage than anyone else in the room had offered her all night. She turned toward Richard. Mr. Whitmore, I tried to tell my manager. I told him who she was. Richard's eyes hardened. This is not the time for staff commentary. Maya held his gaze. It should have been the time for someone to listen. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd. Claire looked around at the guests, suddenly aware that no one was standing with her anymore. Her friends had drifted back toward the tables. Her mother, who had been speaking with donors near the stage, had stopped smiling. Even Daniel Price had stepped away from Danielle, his posture no longer defensive but ashamed. Danielle reached into her clutch and took out her phone. The screen lit up with a message from Naomi Reed, her executive assistant. Boardroom ready. Legal team standing by. Awaiting your direction. Danielle read it once, then raised her eyes toward the enormous screen above the stage. In 18 minutes, the Whitmore family expected that screen to announce their future. Danielle slipped the phone back into her clutch. Mr. Whitmore, she said, calm enough that every word carried farther. I think we should let your guests see exactly what kind of partnership they were about to celebrate. Richard Whitmore looked toward the stage as if he could already see the disaster forming there. The giant screen still displayed the Whitmore Foundation crest, gold letters floating over a slow montage of luxury apartments, ribbon cuttings, and smiling photographs from better years. It was the image Richard had spent decades building. Elegant. Untouchable. Generous. But the room no longer looked at the screen the same way. Now every guest was watching Danielle Brooks. Danielle, Richard said, trying her first name as if familiarity could repair the distance between them. There is no need to make this public. Danielle tilted her head slightly. It became public when your daughter chose to humiliate me in front of 400 people. Claire's eyes flashed. I did not humiliate you. You are twisting everything. Danielle turned toward her. You told me I was the help. You told me to know my place. You treated me as if I could not possibly be a guest in this room. Claire's lips parted, but no answer came. The truth was too clear now, hanging in the air between the chandeliers and the white roses. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Claire made a mistake. She is young. She is 31, Danielle said. And she did not make one mistake. She made a series of choices. A few guests nodded quietly. One woman near the auction table whispered something to her husband. He did not answer, but his expression changed. At the edge of the ballroom, Maya Collins stood beside Daniel Price. Her hands were still trembling, but she no longer looked away. Daniel glanced at her tablet. How much is the deal worth? He asked. Maya swallowed. $1 billion. Daniel looked toward Richard Whitmore. And she can stop it? Maya stared at Danielle. She is not just part of the deal. She is the deal. Richard heard enough to understand the danger. His shoulders stiffened. Ms. Brooks, we have spent 14 months preparing this partnership. Thousands of jobs depend on it. Communities depend on it. Danielle's expression softened for the first time, but not toward him. It softened toward the people he had just mentioned. That is exactly why this matters, she said. A company that wants my capital must prove it can be trusted with people. Not just profits. Not just buildings. People. Richard's voice sharpened. You are going to punish an entire company over one uncomfortable moment? Danielle looked at him without blinking. No. I am deciding whether I should invest in a company whose leadership watched discrimination happen and called it a misunderstanding. The word leadership struck him harder than any accusation. He glanced around the room, searching for allies. His board members had gone quiet. His donors were watching. His wife stood near the stage with one hand pressed against her chest, stunned by the collapse unfolding in front of everyone. Claire took a step forward. You do not know me, she said. Danielle nodded once. You are right. I know you only by what you did when you thought I had no power. The ballroom fell still. Maya looked down at her tablet as a new message appeared from the event office. The executive welcome team was waiting in the private lounge. The financial press had arrived near the rear entrance. The announcement was scheduled in 12 minutes. 12 minutes before the Whitmore family expected applause. 12 minutes before their rescue plan became either a triumph or a warning. Danielle's phone vibrated again. Naomi Reed was calling. Danielle answered and held the phone to her ear. Naomi. Her assistant's voice was calm and precise. The Brooks Meridian board is connected. Legal has reviewed the incident report from Maya Collins and Daniel Price. The investment agreement is ready for your final instruction. Richard moved closer. Danielle, please. Let us speak privately. She looked at him, then at the stage. You had every opportunity to speak privately before you made me a spectacle. Richard's face tightened. What are you going to do? Danielle ended the call and placed her phone back inside her clutch. Then she looked toward the ballroom doors, where the first members of her executive team were entering in dark formal attire. I am going to make sure, she said, that no one in this room mistakes silence for permission again. The ballroom doors opened without fanfare, but the room felt the shift immediately. 3 people entered together, moving with the quiet focus of professionals who did not need to announce why they were there. Naomi Reed walked in front, wearing a charcoal evening suit and carrying a slim leather portfolio. Behind her came Marcus Hale, General Counsel for Brooks Meridian Capital, and Evelyn Grant, the firm's chief operating officer. They did not rush. They did not scan the room for approval. They walked directly toward Danielle Brooks. Richard Whitmore watched them approach, and the last color drained from his face. He knew Naomi. He had sat across from her during negotiations. He had listened to her explain financing terms that his own executives had spent weeks trying to revise. He knew Marcus Hale's name from the legal documents. He knew Evelyn Grant had the authority to pause any transaction connected to Brooks Meridian Capital. Suddenly, the woman he had tried to remove from the Gala was no longer standing alone. She was standing at the center of her own institution. Naomi stopped beside Danielle and handed her the portfolio. "Everything is ready," she said. Danielle accepted it without opening it. "Thank you." Claire looked at the three executives, then at her father. Her voice dropped. "Dad, who are they?" Richard did not answer. He could not. The truth had become too large to hide behind a polite smile. Marcus Hale looked toward Daniel Price, the security supervisor. "We have received an incident report," he said evenly. "We would like a clear account of what occurred from the moment Ms. Brooks entered the ballroom." Daniel straightened. He looked nervous, but he did not look away. Ms. Brooks arrived around 9:18 p.m. She was confronted near the bar by Ms. Whitmore. "I was asked to escort Ms. Brooks out before anyone verified her identity or her invitation." Marcus nodded once. "Did Ms. Brooks threaten anyone?" "No." "Did she disrupt the event?" "No." "Did she refuse a reasonable request?" Daniel glanced at Danielle's black invitation card. "No." She asked why she was being treated differently before providing her credential. The words landed with the weight of a formal record. Richard stepped forward, his voice tight. "This is becoming unnecessarily dramatic. We can address personnel issues after the announcement." Evelyn Grant turned toward him. "This is not a personnel issue. It is a governance issue." Richard's expression hardened. "You are prepared to jeopardize $1 billion partnership over a social misunderstanding?" Danielle opened the portfolio at last. Inside were the final transaction documents, signed by both sides but still pending her authorization. One signature. One decision. $1 billion that could either flow into Whitmore Development or disappear before midnight. Danielle looked down at the papers, then back at Richard. "You keep calling it a misunderstanding because that word protects you from having to name what happened." Claire's voice rose. "I said I was sorry." Danielle turned toward her. "No, you did not." Claire froze. Everyone in the room knew it was true. She had defended herself. She had blamed Danielle. She had waited for her father to fix the consequences. But she had never apologized. Maya Collins stood a few feet away, holding her tablet against her chest. Her manager hovered behind her, suddenly quiet. Danielle noticed Maya's tense shoulders and the way she kept looking at the floor. "Maya," Danielle said. Maya looked up. "Yes, Ms. Brooks? You spoke when it would have been easier to stay silent." Maya swallowed. "I should have spoken sooner." Danielle nodded. "Maybe. But you spoke." Richard looked toward the stage. The clock above the ballroom entrance read 9:53 p.m. 7 minutes remained before the scheduled announcement. Guests had begun checking their phones. Reporters near the rear entrance were whispering to one another. The evening was no longer a gala. It was a reckoning with a countdown. Richard took one last step toward Danielle. "Please," he said, and the words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. "Tell me what you need to move forward." Danielle closed the portfolio. Her eyes were calm, but her voice carried through the ballroom with perfect clarity. "I need to know whether your company can tell the truth when it costs you something." Richard Whitmore stood beneath the chandelier light with the entire ballroom waiting for him to answer. 7 minutes earlier, he had spoken like a man who owned the room. Now he looked like a man trying to find the exit without moving his feet. His eyes traveled from Danielle Brooks to Naomi Reed, then to Marcus Hale and Evelyn Grant. Finally, he looked at Claire. She stood near the marble bar, arms folded tightly across her gown, her confidence reduced to a brittle silence. "Of course we can tell the truth," Richard said. His voice was controlled, but it no longer carried authority. "My family has built this company on integrity." Danielle did not respond immediately. She let the statement sit in the center of the room, where everyone could examine it. Then she looked toward Daniel Price. "Daniel, when Mr. Whitmore asked you to remove me, did he ask whether I had done anything wrong?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "No, ma'am." "Did he ask to see my invitation?" "No, ma'am." "Did he ask whether his daughter had started the confrontation?" Daniel looked at Richard, then back at Danielle. "No." A low murmur moved through the crowd. Richard's shoulders tightened. "I was trying to protect the event," he said. "You were trying to protect your image," Danielle replied. "There is a difference." Claire stepped forward before her father could speak. "This is not fair. You are acting like I committed some terrible crime because I made one comment." Danielle turned to her. "You made more than one comment." Claire's chin lifted. "Fine. I was rude. But you are about to destroy my family's company because you want to make a point." The room became so quiet that the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Danielle's expression did not harden. If anything, it became more measured. "No," she said. "I am deciding what my company will support with $1 billion. That is not a point. That is responsibility." Claire looked toward the guests as if she expected someone to rescue her. No one moved. Her friends stood near the auction tables, avoiding her eyes. Her mother remained near the stage, pale and motionless. Even Richard's board members had stepped back, their faces carrying the same calculation: how much of this had they known, and how much would they now have to explain? Maya Collins watched from beside the check-in desk. Her manager stood behind her, no longer telling her to stay quiet. He was staring at the floor, as if it might offer him a safer version of the evening. Danielle noticed him. "You told Maya not to speak," she said. The manager looked up, startled. "I was trying to keep the situation from escalating." "By silencing the one person who had the facts?" Danielle asked. He had no answer. Richard looked at his watch. 9:56 p.m. 4 minutes until the announcement. The screen above the stage continued to glow with the Whitmore Foundation crest, bright and polished, like a promise no longer believed. Richard took a breath. "What do you want from us?" he asked. Danielle glanced at Naomi. Naomi opened her portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper. "Brooks Meridian Capital requires immediate acknowledgement of the incident, an independent review of event conduct, and a formal commitment to anti-discrimination standards across Whitmore Development," she said. Richard reached for the document, but Danielle raised one hand. "Not yet." He stopped. "There is one more thing," Danielle said. She looked directly at Claire. "A real apology does not begin with explaining why you did it. It begins with naming what you did." Claire's face tightened. For the first time that night, she looked afraid. Not of Danielle. Of the truth waiting for her to say it out loud. The clock changed to 9:57 p.m. 3 minutes remained. Then the ballroom doors opened again, and a staff member hurried toward the stage with a message in his hand. He stopped beside Richard, whispered into his ear, and watched the last hope drain from the Whitmore patriarch's face. The financial press had arrived early. The message reached Richard Whitmore like a final warning from a world he could no longer control. The staff member leaned close and spoke in a hurried whisper, but Richard's reaction said enough. His eyes flicked toward the ballroom entrance, where several reporters now stood behind the velvet rope with cameras, notebooks, and the alert expressions of people who knew a major announcement was about to become a major story. Richard turned back to Danielle Brooks. "This does not need to happen in front of them," he said. Danielle looked toward the reporters, then toward the guests who had watched her be dismissed, judged, and treated as though her presence required an explanation. "It already happened in front of people," she said. "The only question is whether you plan to tell the truth in front of them too." Claire Whitmore stood very still. The ballroom lights reflected off the champagne spilled near the bar, turning the marble floor into a scattered field of gold. A few minutes ago, Claire had looked at that spill as proof that Danielle did not belong. Now it looked like evidence of a moment none of them could erase. Richard took a step toward his daughter. "Claire," he said quietly. "Say what you need to say." She looked at him, stunned. "You want me to apologize now? I want you to fix this." The words came out too fast, too desperate. Danielle heard the difference. So did everyone else. Claire's face tightened. "I did not know who she was." Danielle's gaze held hers. "That is the problem." Claire looked away. For the first time, she seemed to understand that the room was no longer measuring her by her family name, her gown, or the size of the deal waiting on the stage. It was measuring her by the choice she had made when she believed no one important was watching. Danielle's phone vibrated in her clutch. She did not answer it. Her mind had drifted somewhere else for a moment, far from the Grand Meridian Ballroom and its chandeliers. She was 14 years old again, standing beside her mother in a department store outside Cleveland. Her mother had been wearing a navy coat and carrying a handbag she had saved for months to buy. A store clerk had followed them from one aisle to another, pretending to organize shelves. When Danielle's mother finally asked if there was a problem, the clerk smiled and said, "We just need to make sure everything stays where it belongs." Danielle remembered the way her mother had gone quiet. Not weak. Not defeated. Quiet in the way a storm goes quiet before it changes direction. That night, her mother sat at the kitchen table and told her, "Never let anyone else decide the size of your life." Danielle had carried those words through every closed door, every meeting where people assumed she was an assistant, every negotiation where men called her aggressive for asking the same questions they praised each other for asking. And now, in this ballroom, she understood something else. Power was not proven by how loudly you could answer humiliation. It was proven by what you chose to build after it. Danielle returned to the present as Naomi Reed stepped closer. "The board is ready," Naomi said softly. "They are asking whether you want to proceed with the announcement." Richard heard her. His voice dropped. "Danielle, please. Think about the employees. Think about the communities this investment will support." Danielle nodded. "I am thinking about them. That is why I will not attach their future to leaders who cannot recognize harm until it threatens their money." The clock above the entrance changed to 9:58 p.m. 2 minutes remained. The orchestra conductor lifted his hands, uncertain whether to begin the scheduled fanfare. No one moved. Then Maya Collins stepped forward, her voice clear enough to reach the stage. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "the microphones are live." Danielle looked at the glowing screen above the stage. The Whitmore crest shimmered there, waiting for applause. She handed her clutch to Naomi, took the portfolio from Evelyn Grant, and began walking toward the stage. Behind her, Richard Whitmore whispered her name one more time. Danielle did not turn around. Danielle Brooks let her hand rest on the unsigned agreement, while the ballroom waited in complete silence. The paper beneath her fingers represented $1 billion, 14 months of negotiations, and the future Richard Whitmore had promised his family, his board, and every reporter standing near the rear entrance. But Danielle was not looking at the number. She was looking at the people who had revealed what they believed before they knew who she was. Richard stood below the stage with his hands at his sides, trying to appear composed. Claire stood several feet behind him, pale beneath the chandelier light, staring at the floor where the champagne had dried into a faint gold stain. Danielle looked toward the screen, where the Brooks Meridian board waited. "I want the record to be clear," she said. "This decision is not about wounded pride. It is about risk." A board member in Chicago nodded. Another in Atlanta leaned forward, listening. Danielle continued. "A company can have valuable land, impressive projections, and a famous name. But if its leaders cannot recognize bias in their own rooms, then they cannot be trusted to lead fairly in the communities they claim they want to serve." Richard lifted his chin. "Our company has served communities for generations." Danielle looked at him. "Then you should understand that service begins with how you treat a person when you think they cannot benefit you." The sentence moved through the ballroom like a bell. Guests who had remained quiet earlier now looked at one another with discomfort. Some had watched Claire insult Danielle. Some had watched Richard call for security. Some had chosen not to intervene because they did not want to inconvenience a powerful family. Danielle saw that silence too. She did not accuse them. She simply made them face it. "Tonight I was not asking for special treatment," she said. "I was asking for the same basic courtesy this room gives automatically to people it recognizes." Claire looked up at last. Her voice was unsteady. "I was wrong," Everyone turned toward her. Richard glanced back, surprised. Claire swallowed and took a small step forward. I was wrong when I called you the help. I was wrong when I acted like you did not belong. I was wrong because I judged you before I knew anything about you. Her eyes filled, but Danielle's expression remained measured. Claire continued. And I was wrong because I only understood how serious it was when I found out who you were. That was the first honest thing Claire had said all night. Danielle nodded once. Thank you for saying it. Richard stepped forward quickly. Then we can move forward. We can correct this. We can implement every standard you require. Danielle looked down at the agreement again. Then she closed the portfolio. The sound was soft, but it ended the illusion that the deal could be rescued with one apology. Mr. Whitmore, she said, a billion-dollar partnership cannot be built on a promise made in panic. Richard's face went still. What are you saying? Naomi Reed stepped to the podium and placed a prepared statement beside Danielle. Marcus Hale opened a legal folder. Evelyn Grant looked toward the board screen. Danielle lifted her eyes to the audience. Brooks Meridian Capital is withdrawing its investment proposal from Whitmore Development, effective immediately. The words landed without shouting, without spectacle, and without room for negotiation. Richard's shoulders dropped. Claire covered her mouth. A sharp breath moved through the crowd. On the screen, the Brooks Meridian board members nodded in formal approval. Naomi spoke into the microphone. All pending authorization has been cancelled. No funds will be released. The incident from this evening will be documented and reviewed by independent counsel. Richard looked up at Danielle as if he could still find some hidden door back into the future he had expected. You are ending everything over this? Danielle's gaze did not move. No, she said. Your family ended this when you decided respect was something people had to earn from you. For a moment, nobody spoke. The announcement had ended, but the consequences kept moving through the ballroom like a current beneath still water. The Whitmore Foundation crest was gone from the giant screen. In its place, the Brooks Meridian board remained visible, silent and composed, while reporters at the rear entrance began sending messages to their editors. Richard Whitmore stood below the stage, staring at Danielle Brooks as though the words had not reached him yet. $1 billion. Withdrawn. Not delayed. Not renegotiated. Gone. Claire turned toward her father. Say something, she whispered. Richard did not answer. His face had become unreadable, but his hands told the truth. They trembled slightly at his sides. For years, he had built his reputation on certainty. He knew how to enter a room, how to charm a donor, how to make a struggling project sound inevitable. But certainty had abandoned him the moment he decided Danielle's dignity mattered less than his family's comfort. Danielle stood at the podium, calm beneath the lights. She did not look victorious. She looked resolved. Naomi Reed stepped closer and handed her a second document. Danielle read it briefly, then looked toward Marcus Hale. Please explain the next steps. Marcus moved to the microphone. His voice was clear and professional. Brooks Meridian Capital will submit a formal notice of withdrawal tonight. We will also request an independent review of the conduct witnessed at this event, including the decisions made by event leadership and the actions of individuals who attempted to remove Ms. Brooks without verification. Richard finally lifted his head. You are going after my family now? Danielle looked down at him. No. I am protecting my company, my employees, and every community project that would have been tied to your leadership. Richard's voice rose slightly. You are destroying jobs. Danielle's expression remained steady. I am refusing to gamble jobs on a company that has shown me it does not understand accountability. The distinction was sharp. It left him nowhere to hide. A board member from Whitmore Development stepped away from the crowd near the stage. His name was Thomas Reed, and he had spent the evening smiling for donors while privately hoping the deal would close. Now he looked directly at Richard. We need an emergency board meeting, he said. Richard turned toward him. Not now. Thomas did not flinch. Now. The word was quiet, but it changed the room again. Other board members began speaking in low voices. Phones came out. Assistants moved toward the side hallway. The empire Richard had presented as unshakable was suddenly full of cracks, and everyone could see them. Claire watched the board members pull away from her father one by one. "They are leaving us," she said. Danielle heard her. "They are responding to what happened," she said. "There is a difference." Claire looked at Danielle with tears in her eyes. "What am I supposed to do now?" Danielle paused. The question was not polished. It was not strategic. It was the first question Claire had asked that did not try to defend herself. "Start by learning," Danielle said. "Learn why you believed I needed to prove I belonged before you offered me basic respect. Learn why your first instinct was to dismiss me instead of listen. Then use whatever influence you have to make sure the next person is not treated the way you treated me." Claire nodded slowly. She did not look relieved. She looked changed. Near the check-in desk, Maya Collins stood beside her manager. He turned toward her, his voice low. "I should have listened to you." Maya looked at him for a moment. "You should have." Then she walked away from him and toward the stage. Danielle noticed her approaching. Maya stopped a few feet away, uncertain whether she should speak. Danielle smiled gently. "You did the right thing." Maya's eyes filled. "I was scared." "Courage does not mean you were not scared," Danielle said. "It means you decided the truth mattered anyway." Behind them, the ballroom doors opened again as more reporters entered. Richard Whitmore looked toward the exit, then back at the stage. But there was no graceful way to leave a room after everyone had seen who you were. The reporters did not rush the stage. They did not need to. Their presence alone changed the air in the ballroom. Camera lights flickered near the entrance. Notebooks opened. Phones lifted. The Whitmore Gala, designed to celebrate a billion-dollar rescue, had become a story about power, bias, and the price of believing someone could be dismissed without consequence. Richard Whitmore looked toward the reporters, then toward the board members gathering near the side hallway. Thomas Reed was speaking quietly with two directors, his face set with the kind of seriousness that meant decisions were already being made. Richard moved toward them. "We need to control this," he said. Thomas turned to him. "Control what?" Richard lowered his voice. "The narrative." Thomas held his gaze. "The narrative is what happened in this room." Richard's expression tightened. "You are going to turn on me because of one incident?" Thomas did not raise his voice. "I am responding because this was not one incident. It was a failure of judgment from the moment Danielle Brooks walked through that door." Nearby, Claire stood alone beside the marble bar. The guests who had once gathered around her had drifted away, leaving her surrounded by empty space and half-finished champagne glasses. She looked at the floor, then at Danielle on the stage. The woman she had tried to reduce to a stereotype now stood with an entire board behind her, not because she needed them to prove her worth, but because she had built something real. Danielle watched the room settle into its new truth. She saw Maya Collins standing near the stage steps, still holding the tablet that had helped expose the facts. She saw Daniel Price speaking with Marcus Hale, giving a careful account for the written report. She saw Naomi Reed coordinating with the board, calm and exact even as the Whitmore empire began to shake around them. Then Danielle stepped away from the podium. She did not leave the stage. Instead, she walked to its edge and faced the crowd. "Before anyone says this was only about a deal," she began, "I want to be clear about what happened tonight." The ballroom quieted again. "A deal can be replaced. Capital can be redirected. A project can be reconsidered. But the way we treat people reveals what we truly value." Her voice was steady, not angry, but every word reached the back of the room. "I did not withdraw because someone hurt my feelings. I withdrew because I watched a room full of influential people decide that respect could wait until they knew my title." Several guests lowered their eyes. Danielle continued, "That is not a business culture I will fund. It is not a leadership culture I will excuse. And it is not a lesson I will allow young people to learn from watching adults remain silent. Maya looked up at her. Danielle met her eyes. But I also watched someone choose to speak when silence would have been easier. Maya's breath caught. Maya Collins, Danielle said, you showed integrity before you knew whether it would benefit you. That matters. A small ripple of applause began near the front tables. This time, it did not stop. It grew slowly, not as celebration, but as recognition. Guests who had remained quiet earlier began clapping. Some stood. Daniel Price joined them after a moment, his expression sober. Even a few members of the Whitmore board applauded, though their faces showed no joy. Claire did not clap. She stood still, listening. Richard looked at the crowd, then at Danielle, and understood that the room he had believed belonged to him no longer answered to his name. Naomi stepped beside Danielle and spoke softly. The board has approved the alternative plan. Danielle nodded. Earlier that week, Brooks Meridian had prepared a second investment path, one that would fund affordable housing and neighborhood development through a coalition of local builders, community lenders, and nonprofit partners. The Whitmore deal had been the faster option. It was not the only option. Danielle returned to the microphone. The $1 billion will not disappear, she said. The applause faded into attentive silence. It will go where it can do the most good, with partners who understand that communities are not numbers on a presentation. They are people. And people deserve to be seen before they are needed. The reporters began writing faster. Thomas Reed looked toward Richard with a final, tired expression. The future Richard had planned was gone. But Danielle had not taken hope from the room. She had simply refused to place it in the wrong hands. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt different from the silence at the beginning of the night. Earlier, the room had been quiet because people were afraid to interrupt power. Now it was quiet because power had been forced to listen. Danielle Brooks stood beneath the chandeliers with the Brooks Meridian board still visible on the screen behind her. The Whitmore Foundation crest had vanished completely. So had the illusion that wealth could protect anyone from the consequences of their choices. Thomas Reed stepped away from the cluster of Whitmore board members and approached Richard. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed, which was worse. Richard, he said, the board will convene immediately after the gala. You need to step away from all negotiations until the review is complete. Richard stared at him. You cannot be serious. Thomas did not blink. I am serious because this company cannot survive another decision made to protect appearances instead of people. Richard looked around for support. There was none. The directors who had once followed him through every expansion, every acquisition, every polished speech were now looking at their phones, calling attorneys, and speaking in quiet groups. The room had moved on from his authority before he had even accepted that it was gone. Claire stood near the bar, watching her father's world collapse in pieces too small for anyone to catch. She looked toward Danielle, then walked slowly toward the stage. The guests made room for her, but no one reached out. Claire stopped at the bottom step. Ms. Brooks, she said. Danielle looked down at her. Yes? Claire took a breath. I do not expect you to forgive me tonight. I do not expect you to change your decision. But I want to say this without excuses. Her voice trembled, but she continued. I treated you badly because I thought I could. I thought I could decide who belonged here by looking at them. I was wrong. Danielle listened without interrupting. Claire looked toward the crowd. And everyone who saw it should know that I was wrong. No one applauded. This was not a moment for applause. It was a moment for accountability. Danielle nodded once. That is where change begins. Not with being forgiven. With being honest. Claire lowered her head. What do I do with that? Danielle's voice softened. You carry it forward. You learn from it. And the next time someone is being treated unfairly, you do not wait to find out whether they are important before you speak. Claire nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. Then she stepped back. Maya Collins stood near the stage steps, watching the exchange with quiet attention. Danielle turned toward her. Maya, would you come up here? Maya looked startled. Me? Yes, Danielle said. Maya climbed the steps slowly, holding her tablet like it was the only solid thing in the room. When she reached Danielle, the guests watched her with a new kind of respect. Danielle faced the ballroom again. Maya chose truth over comfort tonight, she said. That kind of courage is rare, especially when someone's job is on the line. Maya's former manager looked down. Danielle continued. Maya, Naomi will speak with you tomorrow. Brooks Meridian Capital has a community leadership fellowship opening next month. I think you should apply. Maya's eyes widened. I do not know what to say. Danielle smiled. You already said what mattered. The ballroom erupted into applause again, warmer this time. Not because a deal had been saved. Not because a powerful family had been defeated. But because someone who had felt small in a room full of wealth had been seen for the strength she carried. Naomi stepped beside Danielle and quietly confirmed that the independent review notice had been sent. Marcus Hale had completed the formal withdrawal. Evelyn Grant was already speaking with the community partners who would receive the redirected investment. The work had begun before the gala had even ended. Danielle looked once more at the room. At Richard, standing alone among the remains of his certainty. At Claire, facing the first honest consequence of her life. At Maya, standing taller than she had an hour earlier. Then Danielle stepped away from the podium, leaving behind no signature, no rescue, and no doubt about what dignity was worth. Danielle Brooks walked down from the stage as the ballroom began to breathe again. The orchestra did not resume. No one returned to the dance floor. The white roses still stood in their glass vases, the chandeliers still scattered light across the marble, and the auction tables still displayed their polished prizes. But the room was no longer the same room. An hour earlier, people had measured one another by names, gowns, invitations, and access. Now they had watched a different measure take hold. Maya Collins stood near the stage steps, holding her tablet with both hands. Danielle paused beside her. You did well tonight, Danielle said. Maya looked toward the ballroom, where guests were speaking in low voices and reporters were gathering final details. I almost did not say anything, Maya admitted. I thought I would lose my job. Danielle nodded. That fear is real. But you chose not to let it make the decision for you. Maya looked up. What happens to the Whitmores now? Danielle glanced across the room. Richard Whitmore was leaving through the side hallway with Thomas Reed and the other board members. He did not look back. Claire stood alone near the bar for one final moment before her mother approached and quietly led her away. There was no dramatic exit. No shouting. No applause for their downfall. Just the slow, unmistakable consequence of a family learning that reputation could not survive without character. What happens next is up to them, Danielle said. Accountability is not something another person can do for you. Naomi Reed joined them with Danielle's clutch and a calm expression. The Community Coalition has accepted the preliminary terms, she said. They are ready to begin planning as soon as the board approves the final structure. Danielle smiled. Good. The $1 billion that had nearly become a lifeline for the Whitmore empire would now be directed toward neighborhood builders, local lenders, and organizations that had spent years doing the work without gala speeches or gold banners. It would support homes, jobs, and communities through people who understood that trust was not a decoration placed on a brochure. It was the foundation beneath every promise. Danielle turned toward the remaining guests. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked inspired. Some looked uncertain about what they should say after watching their comfortable evening become a lesson they had not expected. Danielle did not ask them for praise. She did not ask them to choose sides. She simply spoke one final time. Tonight was never about proving that I belonged in this room, she said. I belonged before anyone recognized my name. Every person does. The ballroom became still again. The problem was never that they did not know who I was. The problem was how they treated someone they believed had no power. Her voice stayed calm, but it reached every corner. Do not wait for a title, a bank account, or a camera to remind you that another person deserves respect. Give it first. Give it when no one is watching. Give it when it costs you something. Maya stood beside her, listening with tears in her eyes. Danielle looked at her and added, "And when you see someone being pushed aside, remember that your voice may be the first door that opens." A few guests began to clap. Then more joined them, not loudly at first, but steadily. Danielle accepted the sound without changing her expression. She had not come to the gala for applause. She had come to make a decision. And she had made it. As she walked toward the ballroom doors with Naomi, Marcus, Evelyn, and Maya beside her, the chandeliers glowed behind them like a fading memory. Danielle did not need to raise her voice. She did not need to prove her worth. She had become the proof.